A German shepherd stuck in a bottle couldn't eat for 10 days, and what happened next is unbelievable. On a dusty Texas road, a starving puppy stretched out its paw, begging a stranger to save its life. But when the bottle finally came off, the real nightmare began. Because this wasn't an accident, it was a warning. The man who rescued the dog thought he was doing the right thing, until he found himself face to face with someone who would stop at nothing to get it back. Threats, violence, secrets no one was supposed to uncover. And the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous it became, not just for him, but for the one person he loved most. What kind of cruelty could drive someone to trap an innocent animal like this? And how far will one ordinary man go when saving a life puts his own in deadly jeopardy? Your presence here is powerful. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet gestures of compassion that truly stand out. If your heart still makes room for kindness, you're already one of us. The Texas sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in broad strokes of orange and purple as Warren Keats guided his weathered pickup truck along the dusty back road toward home. His hands, still bearing traces of engine grease despite thorough scrubbing, gripped the steering wheel loosely. The day's work at his garage had been long and demanding. 3 timing belts, 2 transmission jobs, and a stubborn carburetor that had tested his patience until sunset. The familiar stretch of road unwound before him like a ribbon of faded asphalt, bordered by patches of dry grass and scattered mesquite trees. Warren had driven this route countless times over his 20 years as a mechanic, but something about this evening felt different. Maybe it was the way the dying light caught the dust particles floating in the air, or perhaps it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. That's when he saw it. A slight movement in his peripheral vision, barely noticeable against the roadside debris. Warren might have missed it entirely if not for the last rays of sunlight catching what looked like glass, creating a brief flash that caught his attention. He eased off the accelerator, squinting through his windshield. There was definitely something there, moving weakly in the dirt. His first instinct was to drive on. He'd seen plenty of unfortunate wildlife on these back roads over the years. But something made him tap the brake pedal instead. The truck's tires crunched on the gravel shoulder as Warren pulled over. He sat for a moment, engine idling, debating whether to investigate. With a deep sigh, he switched off the ignition and stepped out into the cooling evening air. As he approached the source of movement, his work boots kicking up small clouds of dust, Warren's heart sank. There, struggling weakly in the dirt, was a German shepherd puppy. But what made his stomach turn was the glass bottle forced over the pup's head, like some cruel muzzle. The dog's ribs showed clearly through its dulled coat, and one paw trembled feebly, reaching out as if pleading for help. "Jesus Christ," Warren muttered, dropping to his knees beside the suffering animal. The puppy's eyes, visible through the clouded glass, were glazed with fear and exhaustion. Its tongue lolled dry and swollen, clear signs of severe dehydration. Warren could tell the poor creature hadn't had water in days, trapped in this horrific predicament. He reached out slowly, careful not to startle the weakened animal. "Easy there, little fella," he said softly, his normally gruff voice gentling instinctively. The puppy didn't even have the strength to flinch, just blinked slowly at him through its glass prison. Warren's hands, so skilled at fixing engines and machinery, now faced a more delicate challenge. The bottle had been forced down past the dog's ears, making it impossible for the animal to shake it off. He examined the glass carefully, noting how it had created a greenhouse effect in the Texas heat, practically cooking the poor creature alive. Who would do something like this? He wondered aloud, anger coloring his words. The deliberate cruelty of the act was obvious. This was no accident. Someone had intentionally trapped this helpless animal in a torture device and left it to die. Working as gently as he could, Warren began to manipulate the bottle, trying to find the right angle to remove it without causing more harm. The puppy whimpered weakly, but didn't struggle. "I know, buddy. I know it hurts. Just hang in there a little longer." The glass was slick with condensation from the dog's labored breathing, making it difficult to grip. Warren removed his work shirt, using it to get a better hold on the bottle. With painstaking care, he twisted and turned the container, working it gradually upward. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the bottle finally came free with a soft pop. The puppy gasped, taking its first unobstructed breath in what must have been days. Its head lolled weakly, too exhausted to even lift it. Warren didn't waste any time. He shrugged off his undershirt, gently wrapping the trembling animal in the soft cotton. The dog was burning hot to the touch, its body temperature dangerously elevated from its glass prison. "All right, little one," he murmured, carefully lifting the bundle. "Let's get you some help." The puppy weighed almost nothing in his arms, just skin and bones beneath its matted fur. Moving quickly but smoothly to avoid jostling his fragile cargo, Warren returned to his truck. He placed the wrapped puppy on the passenger seat with utmost care, then hurried around to the driver's side. The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving only a faint glow on the western horizon. As he started the engine, Warren glanced at his unexpected passenger. The dog's eyes were closed, but its chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. He reached over and gently stroked its head with one calloused finger. "Stay with me, buddy. Just stay with me." Warren's mind raced as he pulled back onto the road, pressing the accelerator harder than usual. The nearest veterinary clinic was in town, a good 20 minutes away under normal circumstances. He wasn't sure the puppy had 20 minutes. The pickup's headlights cut through the gathering darkness as Warren drove, occasionally glancing at his passenger. The bundle of his shirt barely moved with the dog's weak breathing. Every few minutes, he would reach over to touch the puppy gently, reassuring himself that it was still alive. His usual route home forgotten, Warren focused solely on reaching town as quickly as possible. The truck's engine growled as he pushed it harder than he had in years, eating up the miles of empty road. His hands clenched the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set in determination. Warren wasn't sure exactly why he felt so strongly about saving this one animal. He'd seen plenty of strays before, had even helped a few over the years. But something about the deliberate cruelty of this act, the helplessness of the puppy, struck a chord deep within him. The lights of town began to appear in the distance, and Warren felt a small surge of hope. The puppy had made it this far. Maybe it had a fighting chance. He looked down at the small bundle once more, noticing how the dog's breathing seemed even weaker than before. "Almost there," he said softly, more to himself than the unconscious animal. "Just hold on a little longer." The truck's tires hummed against the pavement as Warren pressed the accelerator further, racing against time to save a life he never expected to find on that lonely Texas road. His choice to stop, to help, had been almost instinctive, a moment of basic human compassion that would prove to be the first step in a journey he couldn't yet imagine. For now, though, Warren focused only on the immediate need, keeping this innocent creature alive. The medical district was just ahead, its familiar buildings now taking on new significance. Warren had driven past the veterinary clinic countless times without giving it a second thought. Tonight, it represented the difference between life and death for the puppy beside him. In the growing darkness, the truck's headlights illuminated the road ahead, guiding Warren and his precious cargo toward help. The consequences of his decision to stop, to intervene, would unfold in ways he couldn't predict. But in this moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he had done the right thing. This evening's drive home had transformed from a routine commute into something far more significant, A rescue mission that would change more than just one puppy's fate. Warren Keats, the solitary mechanic who preferred the company of engines to people, had taken the first step on a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the world. Warren pulled into the veterinary clinic's parking lot with a screech of tires. The closed sign glowed in the window, but he could see lights on inside. Without hesitation, he gathered the bundled puppy and rushed to the door, pounding on it with his free hand. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, a woman in scrubs appeared. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. A large, grease-stained man cradling what looked like a bundle of dirty clothes. "Please," Warren said, his voice rough. "Found him on the road. He's barely breathing." The woman, her name tag read, Dr. Cecilia Grant, quickly unlocked the door. "Bring him in," she commanded, all business now. "Follow me to the exam room." Warren trailed behind her through the sterile corridor, his heavy work boots echoing on the linoleum. The fluorescent lights made everything seem harsh and too bright after the darkness outside. In the exam room, Dr. Grant cleared a metal table. "Put him here," she instructed, already pulling on latex gloves. Warren carefully placed his bundle down, helping her unwrap the shirt. Dr. Grant's sharp intake of breath told him everything. Her hands moved expertly over the puppy's emaciated body, checking vital signs. "How did you find him?" "Had his head stuck in a glass bottle," Warren explained, watching anxiously as she worked. "Out on County Road 12, he was just lying there." The vet's movements became more focused, intense. She lifted the puppy's lips, checked his gums, eyes, and skin elasticity. "This puppy hasn't eaten in at least 8 to 10 days, she said grimly. "He's severely dehydrated." She paused, examining the dog's neck. "And these marks around his neck, this wasn't an accident." Warren felt his stomach turn. "What do you mean?" Dr. Grant looked up at him, her green eyes hard. The bottle was forced onto his head. "See these abrasions? Someone did this deliberately." She turned back to her patient, efficiently setting up an IV line. "They wanted him to suffer." The words hit Warren like a physical blow. He'd assumed it was a terrible accident. Maybe the puppy had gotten curious about food scraps in the bottle. But this was something else entirely. "Will he make it?" Warren asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do everything I can." "Doctor," Grant replied, already mixing medications. "But the next 12 hours will be critical. He's young, which works in his favor, but he's extremely weak." Warren watched as she worked, inserting the IV, checking temperature, administering fluids and medications. His mind kept returning to what she'd said. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone had taken this helpless animal and sentenced it to a slow, agonizing death. "You can wait in the reception area, Doctor," Grant said gently. "This will take a while." Warren nodded but didn't move. "I'll stay if that's all right." She glanced at him, something softening in her expression. "Of course. There's a chair in the corner." Hours ticked by. Warren sat in the hard plastic chair, watching the vet work. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting medications, cleaning the puppy's matted fur with warm cloths. Occasionally she would murmur softly to the unconscious animal, words of encouragement that Warren could barely hear. Around midnight, Dr. Grant stepped back, rolling her shoulders. "I've done what I can for now. The next few hours will tell us more." Warren leaned forward. "How's he doing?" "His temperature's stabilizing, and he's responding to the fluids. But he's still extremely weak." She studied Warren for a moment. "You should go home, get some rest. I'll call you if anything changes." Warren shook his head. "I'd rather stay, if you don't mind." He couldn't explain it, even to himself, but the thought of leaving felt wrong. This puppy had reached out to him on that dusty road, had trusted him for help. He couldn't walk away now. Dr. Grant's expression was unreadable. "Suit yourself. I'll get you a better chair, at least." She returned with a padded office chair and a cup of coffee. "Sugar's on the counter if you want it," she said, then returned to monitoring her patient. The night stretched on. Warren dozed occasionally, but mostly stayed awake, watching the steady rise and fall of the puppy's chest. Every hour, Dr. Grant would check vitals, adjust medications, make notes on her chart. Sometimes she would explain what she was doing, her voice low and professional, grounding Warren in the reality of medical care rather than the horror of what had caused this. Around 3 a.m, the puppy stirred slightly. Both Warren and Dr. Grant were instantly alert. The dog's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed, before closing again. "That's a good sign, Doctor," Grant said quietly. "He's fighting." Warren felt something catch in his throat. He'd spent years keeping to himself, focusing on his work, avoiding complications. But watching this small creature struggle for life had cracked something open inside him, something he hadn't even realized was closed. Dawn began to creep through the windows, painting the sterile room in soft pinks and golds. The puppy's breathing had grown stronger, more regular. Dr. Grant's tense shoulders had relaxed slightly, though she remained vigilant. Warren sat in his chair, his coffee long cold and forgotten. His body ached from the uncomfortable position, and his eyes burned with fatigue. But underneath the exhaustion was a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. Someone had tried to kill this puppy in one of the cruelest ways possible. The thought made his hands clench into fists. As morning light filled the room, Dr. Grant finally smiled, a small, tired expression but genuine. "I think he's going to make it," she said. "He's not out of the woods yet, but his vitals are improving. He's got a fighting spirit." Warren stood, his joints protesting the movement. He approached the table carefully, looking down at the puppy. In the daylight, he could see the German Shepherd markings more clearly, black and tan fur, though dull from malnutrition. The dog's ribs were still painfully visible, but there was color in his gums now, and his breathing was steady. "Thank you," Warren said gruffly, the words feeling inadequate for the hours of intensive care he'd witnessed. Dr. Grant nodded, professional mask slipping to show her own exhaustion. "Thank you for bringing him in. Most people would have driven past." The words hung in the air between them, along with the unspoken knowledge that somewhere out there, someone had done far worse than simply drive past. Someone had deliberately caused this suffering. The puppy twitched in his sleep, a small whimper escaping. Without thinking, Warren reached out, gently stroking the dog's head. Under his calloused fingers, he could feel the warmth of life, the steady pulse that had seemed so fragile just hours before. In that moment, Warren knew his life had changed. His quiet, solitary existence had been interrupted by a dying puppy on a dusty road, and he couldn't go back to the way things were. Not knowing what he knew now, not after sitting through this night, watching this small life fight its way back from the brink. The bell above the veterinary clinic's door chimed violently as Curtis Harlow burst in, his expensive boots thundering against the linoleum floor. The waiting room fell silent as his imposing figure filled the doorway, blocking out the afternoon sun. His shadow stretched across the floor like a dark omen, reaching toward where Warren sat. "Where's my dog?" Curtis's voice boomed through the quiet space, making the magazines on the nearby table flutter. His silver belt buckle caught the fluorescent light as he stepped forward, each movement deliberate and threatening. Warren stood slowly, his work-worn hand steady at his sides. "Your dog?" The words came out carefully measured, though his heart hammered in his chest. Curtis's weathered face twisted into something ugly. "That German shepherd pup, the one you stole off my property?" His eyes, cold and hard as winter ice, fixed on Warren. "I've got witnesses who saw your truck near my fence line yesterday evening." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Warren's mind flashed back to the helpless puppy he'd found, its head trapped in that bottle, dying in the dust. His jaw clenched. "That dog was abandoned on a public road, Mr. Harlow, miles from your ranch. Everything in this county belongs to somebody, boy." Curtis took another step forward, his custom leather boots creaking. "And that pup belongs to me. I've got papers to prove it." The door to the examination rooms opened, and Dr. Cecilia Grant emerged, her face set in professional lines. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Curtis turned his intimidating presence toward her. "No problem at all, Doc. Just here to collect my property." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "Got the registration right here. That pup's from my breeding stock." Dr. Grant took the paper, her eyes scanning it quickly. Warren noticed her hands were slightly unsteady, but her voice remained firm. "Mr. Harlow, this dog was brought in with severe signs of abuse and neglect. As a veterinary professional, I'm obligated to report." "Report what?" Curtis cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Accidents happen all the time with animals. Could have gotten itself stuck somewhere. Could have wandered off. Nobody's fault." Warren stepped forward, positioning himself between Curtis and the door to the back rooms. "It wasn't an accident. That bottle was forced onto that pup's head. Someone meant to hurt it." Curtis's face darkened like a thundercloud. "You calling me a liar, boy? Suggesting I'd harm my own property?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "Look here. I'll make this simple. Whatever the bill is for treatment, I'll pay it. Double it even. And we'll forget this whole misunderstanding." "It's not about money," Warren said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "Everything's about money," Curtis snapped, slapping the checkbook down on the reception counter. "Name your price. That dog is mine and I'm taking it home today." Dr. Grant cleared her throat. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Harlow. The puppy is in critical condition and needs continued medical care. Moving it now would be dangerous to its health." Curtis's face flushed red. "Don't you dare tell me what I can and can't do with my own property. I've got friends in the county commissioner's office. One phone call, and they'll be taking a real close look at your business licenses." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Grant's face paled slightly, but she stood her ground. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Harlow?" "Threatening?" Curtis's laugh was sharp and ugly. "I'm just stating facts. Now where's my dog?" Warren felt something snap inside him. All his life, he'd kept his head down, stayed out of trouble. But the memory of that trembling paw reaching out to him, the trust in those eyes when he'd freed it from the bottle, it changed something. "The dog stays here." Curtis turned to him slowly, menace radiating from every inch of his frame. "You don't want to make an enemy of me, boy. I've buried better men than you under lawsuits they never saw coming. One word from me, and your little garage will be drowning in code violations. How long you think you can keep those doors open when every inspector in the county is breathing down your neck? Is that supposed to scare me?" Warren's voice was quiet but firm. "It should." Curtis stepped closer, until they were almost nose to nose. "Because I'm just getting started. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never stopped on that road. You'll wish you'd kept driving and minded your own damn business." "The law," Warren began. "The law?" Curtis laughed again, the sound echoing off the clinic walls. "Boy, I am the law in this county. My family's been here for 4 generations. We built this place. You think anybody's going to take your word over mine? You think anybody's going to care about one worthless mutt? I care, Warren said simply. Curtis's face twisted with rage. Then you're even dumber than you look. He turned to Dr. Grant. You've got 24 hours to release that dog to me. After that, I start making phone calls. And trust me, neither of you wants that. He stormed toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. One day, boy, think real hard about what side of this you want to be on. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was deafening. Warren's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline leaving his system in a rush. He looked at Dr. Grant, who had sunk into a chair behind the reception desk. He means it, she said quietly. Every word. Curtis Harlow doesn't make idle threats. Warren nodded slowly. I know. He walked to the window, watching Curtis's expensive truck kick up dust as it roared away. But that doesn't change anything. That dog needs help, and I'm not backing down. Dr. Grant studied him for a long moment. This won't be easy. He's got money, influence, connections. He can make both our lives very difficult. Some things are worth fighting for, Warren said, turning back to face her. That pup trusted me when I found it. I'm not betraying that trust now, no matter what Curtis Harlow threatens. The weight of the decision settled over them both. Through the door to the back rooms, they could hear the faint whimper of the puppy, fighting for its life. Warren knew he'd just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county, but looking toward that sound, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The battle lines had been drawn. Curtis Harlow might have money and influence on his side, but Warren had something stronger, the absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing. Sometimes that was enough to stand against all the power in the world. Warren's old pickup truck rumbled down the gravel driveway, leading to his modest ranch-style home. The setting sun painted the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. In the passenger seat, wrapped carefully in his work jacket, the German Shepherd puppy lay quiet but alert, his amber eyes following every movement. Home sweet home, Warren muttered, more to himself than the dog. His hands were still shaking slightly from the confrontation with Curtis Harlow at the vet's office. The memory of the wealthy rancher's threats hung heavy in his mind. As he pulled to a stop, the front door burst open. His 15-year-old niece Delia bounded down the porch steps, her long brown hair flying behind her. Uncle Warren, is this the puppy you texted me about? Warren couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Easy now, Delia. He's been through a lot. Delia slowed her approach, her expression softening as she peered into the truck. Oh my goodness, she whispered, taking in the puppy's condition. Despite Dr. Grant's care, the dog was still terribly thin, his ribs visible beneath his dull coat. He's so skinny. Warren carefully lifted the bundle from the truck. Dr. Grant says he'll need special food and lots of rest. Think you can help me with that? Of course! Delia's eyes were already filling with tears of compassion. She reached out slowly, letting the puppy sniff her hand. To Warren's surprise, the dog's tail gave a tentative wag. He needs a name, she declared. Warren led the way into the house, trying to keep his voice light despite his worries. Got any ideas? Delia followed, watching the puppy intently. What about Chance? Because you gave him a second chance at life? The name hit Warren right in the heart. Chance. He repeated softly. The puppy's ears perked up, and Warren nodded. I think he likes it. They settled Chance onto a soft blanket in the living room. Delia immediately sat cross-legged beside him, speaking in gentle tones while Warren prepared the special food Dr. Grant had sent home with them. The scene should have been peaceful, but Warren couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. His fears proved justified the very next morning. Warren stepped out onto his front porch and immediately noticed something wrong with his truck. All 4 tires were flat, deep slash marks visible in the rubber. His stomach clenched as he walked around the vehicle, noting the deliberate nature of the damage. "Uncle Warren?" Delia's voice came from the doorway. "What's wrong?" He turned, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart. Just some truck trouble." But Delia was too smart for that. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. "This is because of chance, isn't it? Because of that man at the vet's?" Warren sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Curtis Harlow doesn't like being told no. Inside, Chance lifted his head from his blanket, watching them through the screen door. He'd already gained a little strength overnight, and his eyes seemed more alert. Warren met that amber gaze and felt his resolve strengthen. No matter what Curtis threw at them, he wouldn't let that dog go back to abuse. The tire slashing was just the beginning. At the grocery store later that day, Warren noticed the whispers and sideways glances. Mrs. Peterson, who'd always been friendly, deliberately turned down another aisle to avoid him. The checkout clerk, Tommy, who usually chatted about football, barely made eye contact. "Heard you stole Curtis Harlow's prize breeding dog." Tommy mumbled as he bagged Warren's groceries. Warren's jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." "Just saying what people are saying." Tommy shrugged, but wouldn't meet Warren's eyes. The rumors spread like wildfire through their small town. By the time Warren stopped at his garage to check on things, his longtime customer Bob Wilson was waiting to tell him he'd be taking his business elsewhere. "Can't risk association with someone who's crossed Curtis Harlow," Bob said apologetically. Warren stood in his empty garage, the familiar smell of oil and metal suddenly suffocating. He'd built this business from nothing, working honest and hard for 20 years. Now Curtis Harlow was trying to tear it all down over a dog he'd nearly killed. When he got home, Delia was sitting on the porch with Chance, who had managed to walk a few steps on his own. The sight of them together, his niece gently encouraging the recovering pup, made something fierce and protective rise in Warren's chest. "The whole town's talking, isn't it?" Delia asked, her young face serious beyond her years. Warren settled onto the porch step beside her. "Curtis Harlow has a lot of influence around here. But you're not giving Chance back." It wasn't a question. "No," Warren said firmly. "I'm not." Chance lifted his head and scooted closer, pressing against Warren's leg. Despite everything, the slashed tires, the whispers, the lost business, Warren knew he'd make the same choice again. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about standing up to cruelty, about showing Delia what it meant to do the right thing even when it was hard. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the phone rang. Warren answered to hear Mike Thompson, his parts supplier for the garage, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "Listen, Warren, I'm real sorry, but I can't extend you credit anymore. Nothing personal, you understand?" Warren hung up without responding. Across the table, Delia watched him with worried eyes while Chance dozed in his new bed nearby, unaware of the storm brewing around him. "We'll be okay," Warren told Delia, forcing a smile. "Sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price." "But it's not fair," Delia protested, her fork clattering against her plate. "Everyone knows Curtis Harlow is mean. They're just too scared to stand up to him." Warren reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Being right doesn't always make things easier, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean we stop doing what's right." Later that night, after Delia had gone to bed, Warren sat on the porch with Chance. The puppy's head rested on his knee, those intelligent eyes looking up at him with complete trust. The night was quiet, except for the chirp of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Warren thought about Curtis Harlow's threats, about the slashed tires and whispered accusations. He thought about his business, built over decades of honest work, now threatened because he refused to return a dog to someone who'd tried to kill it. The situation was escalating, and Warren knew it would probably get worse before it got better. But looking down at Chance, seeing how the pup had already begun to trust and heal despite everything he'd been through, Warren felt his determination harden into something unshakable. Curtis Harlow might have money and influence, but Warren had the truth on his side, and a good dog worth fighting for. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the horizon when Warren heard Chance's deep, menacing growl from the front of the house. The sound sent chills down his spine. It wasn't the playful rumble he'd grown used to hearing when they wrestled, or the excited bark that greeted him after work. This was different, primal, warning. Warren threw off his covers and grabbed the baseball bat he'd started keeping beside his bed. His bare feet made soft, padding sounds against the wooden floor as he moved through the darkened house. Chance's growls grew louder, more insistent. "What is it, boy?" Warren whispered, his hand finding the dog's trembling back in the dim light of the living room. Chance stood rigid by the front window, his amber eyes fixed on something outside, hackles raised. The morning air hit Warren's face as he opened the front door, Chance pressing against his leg. The sky was that peculiar grey-purple of early dawn, making shadows stretch long and dark across his property. At first, everything seemed normal. His truck parked where he'd left it, tools still scattered on the workbench where he'd been fixing Delia's bike. Then he saw it. The sight hit him like a physical blow. Nailed to his garage door was a dead coyote, its grey-brown fur matted with blood, limbs splayed out like some kind of twisted crucifixion. A crude message had been carved into the wooden door beneath it. Next time. Warren's stomach churned. The message was clear. Curtis Harlow was escalating from simple intimidation to outright threats of violence. Chance's growls had turned to whimpers, the dog pressing closer to Warren's side as if seeking reassurance. "Uncle Warren?" Delia's voice came from behind him, small and uncertain. "What's wrong? I heard Chance dash." "Go back inside, honey," Warren said quickly, turning to block her view. But it was too late. He saw the exact moment she spotted the grotesque display, her face draining of color. "Oh my God," she whispered, hand flying to her mouth. Did Mr. Harlow do this?" Warren guided her back towards the house, one arm around her shoulders. She was shaking. "Let's get inside. I'll call Sheriff Martinez." In the kitchen, Warren made hot chocolate, Delia's comfort drink since she was little, while he waited for the sheriff. Chance hadn't left Delia's side, his head resting on her lap as she sat at the kitchen table, still trembling slightly. "Maybe." Delia started, then stopped, staring into her mug. "Maybe we should just give Chance back." The words hung heavy in the air. Warren looked at the dog, who had recovered remarkably in the past few days. His ribs were still visible, but his eyes were bright and alert, and the trust he showed in them both was absolute. The thought of returning him to Curtis made Warren's blood boil. "No," Warren said firmly, sitting down across from his niece. "That's not an option. But what if he hurts you? Or Chance again? Or—" Her voice cracked. Warren reached across the table and took her hand. "Listen to me, Delia. Some things are worth fighting for. What Curtis did to Chance was wrong. Giving in to bullies like him, it only makes them stronger." Chance lifted his head at the sound of his name, looking between them with those intelligent eyes. The dog they'd saved had saved something in them too, given them purpose, brought them closer together. Sheriff Martinez arrived 30 minutes later, his face grim as he photographed the scene. "This is escalating fast," he said, helping Warren take down the coyote. "Curtis Harlow's always been mean, but this is different. You should consider getting some security cameras installed." "Will you arrest him?" Delia asked from the doorway, Chance at her heels. The sheriff sighed, Without direct evidence, my hands are tied. Everyone knows it was him, but proving it—" He shook his head. "I'll increase patrols in your area, Warren, but be careful. Men like Curtis, they're used to getting their way." After the sheriff left, Warren spent the morning scrubbing the garage door, trying to remove the blood stains. His mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Curtis clearly wasn't going to stop. The dead coyote was just the beginning, a warning shot across the bow. Delia brought him lunch, sandwich and water balanced on a plate. "I've been thinking," she said, watching him work. "Remember what you told me when I wanted to quit the swim team because Jenny Matthews was bullying me?" Warren paused, rag in hand. "Remind me." "You said that sometimes doing the right thing is scary, but that doesn't make it any less right." She scratched behind Chance's ears. "This is like that, isn't it?" Warren looked at his niece, no longer the little girl he'd taken in after his sister's death, but growing into a young woman with a strong sense of justice. Then at Chance, who had survived unimaginable cruelty, yet still found the capacity to trust and love. "Yeah," he said softly. "This is exactly like that." That evening, as the sun set over their property, Warren sat on the porch steps with Chance beside him. The dog's head rested on his knee, a warm, solid presence that somehow made his burdens feel lighter. "We're in this together now, aren't we, boy?" he murmured, running his hand over the dog's slowly healing body. Chance looked up at him with those amber eyes, and Warren saw his own determination reflected back. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about standing up to cruelty, about teaching Delia that some fights were worth having, some principles worth defending. Curtis Harlow had wanted to frighten them into submission with his grotesque warning, but he'd achieved the opposite. Warren had made his choice. He would see this through, whatever the cost. Because sometimes the right path wasn't the easy one, and sometimes the family you chose, even if it included a rescued German shepherd, was worth fighting for. The morning after the coyote incident, Warren sat in his truck outside the Dusty Spur, a dingy bar on the outskirts of town. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he watched the early crowd shuffle in. He'd heard through the garage grapevine that Miguel Santos, one of Curtis's former ranch hands, could usually be found here. The place smelled of stale beer and decades of cigarette smoke when Warren pushed through the door. In the dim light, he spotted Miguel sitting alone at the bar, nursing what looked like his breakfast, a half-empty glass of whiskey. "Mind if I join you?" Warren asked, sliding onto the neighboring stool. Miguel glanced sideways, recognition flickering across his weathered face. "You're the one who took Curtis's dog." "The one he tried to kill, you mean?" Warren kept his voice low, ordering a coffee from the bartender. "I need to know what happened on that ranch, Miguel, and I think you need to tell someone." The older man's hands trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. "Don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Warren leaned closer. "That bottle didn't get on Chance's head by accident, and I'm betting it wasn't the first time something like that happened." Miguel stared into his drink for a long moment. The morning sun filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the empty bar. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You got somewhere private we can talk?" 20 minutes later, they sat in Warren's truck behind the bar. Miguel's hands shook as he pulled a worn notebook from his jacket pocket. "Started keeping track after the third one," he said, passing it over. "Couldn't sleep at night, you know? Thought maybe if I wrote it down, made it real somehow." Warren opened the notebook, and his stomach turned. Page after page of dates, descriptions, names. Dogs that had disappeared from Curtis's ranch over the years. Some shot for being too slow to learn commands. Others drowned for showing fear. Puppies buried alive for being the runts of the litter. 47. Miguel said, his voice cracking. That's how many I saw him kill in the 5 years I worked there. Always had an excuse. Too weak, too stupid, too soft. But really? He took a shuddering breath. He enjoyed it. Got off on having that power. Warren felt sick as he read through the details. Each entry was methodically recorded. Dates, methods, even locations where bodies were buried. Why didn't you report this? Miguel laughed bitterly. To who? Sheriff can't touch him. Curtis owns half the county council. Besides, they're just dogs, right? That's what everyone would say. He rubbed his face. I quit last month, couldn't take it anymore, but I kept the notebook. Thought maybe someday someone would listen. Warren finished. He studied a particularly detailed entry about a young German shepherd that had been shot for lacking aggression during training. These are all documented? You'd testify to this? If it would make a difference. Miguel looked out the window. That pup you saved, he was meant to be number 48. Curtis had been working him hard, trying to turn him mean. But the dog wouldn't break. Kept wagging his tail, trying to please. Made Curtis crazy with anger. Warren thought of Chance. How despite everything he'd been through, he still trusted, still showed affection. That's why he did it? Because the dog was too gentle? Curtis put that bottle on his head personally. Said if the dog was too soft to be useful, he'd make sure no one else could use him either. Miguel's hands clenched into fists. Left him to suffocate slowly. I couldn't watch it happen again. That's when I quit. The morning sun had climbed higher, streaming through the truck's windshield. Warren carefully photographed each page of the notebook with his phone, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd discovered. I'll need to keep this, he said, holding up the notebook. And I'll need you to talk to some people. Animal control, maybe the state police, someone outside Curtis's influence. Miguel nodded slowly. You really think you can stop him? I have to try. This isn't just about Chance anymore. Warren started the truck. This has to end. On the drive home, Warren's thoughts churned with everything he'd learned. The scale of Curtis's cruelty was staggering. 47 dogs, systematically tortured and killed over 5 years. And those were just the ones Miguel had witnessed. How many more had there been before? How many would there be if no one stood up to stop it? He pulled into his driveway to find Delia playing fetch with Chance in the front yard. The dog was getting stronger every day, his movements more fluid, his joy more apparent. When he saw Warren, he bounded over, tail wagging furiously. Warren crouched down, letting Chance lick his face as he ran his hands over the dog's healthy frame. By all rights, this dog should be dead. Should be number 48 in Miguel's grim accounting. Instead, he was here, living proof of survival against impossible odds. What's wrong? Delia asked, noticing his expression. Did something happen? Warren stood, the notebook heavy in his pocket. I found out some things about Curtis, about what he's been doing on that ranch. He hesitated, not wanting to burden her with the full horror of it. Let's just say Chance isn't the first dog he's hurt, but if I have anything to say about it, he'll be the last. Chance pressed against his leg, as if sensing his distress. Warren looked down at those trusting amber eyes and made a silent promise. The evidence in his pocket would either be Curtis's downfall or his own, but either way the truth was finally going to come out. No more dogs would die on that ranch. No more silent graves would be dug in the dark. The pattern would end here, with this one survivor who had somehow found his way to them. Warren just had to figure out how to make the evidence count, how to break through the wall of protection Curtis had built around himself. But for now, he had proof. And with proof came purpose, not just to protect one dog, but to expose a darkness that had gone unchecked for far too long. 20 minutes later, They sat in Warren's truck behind the bar. Miguel's hands shook as he pulled a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. "Been carrying these around for 2 years?" Miguel said, his voice rough. "Never knew what to do with them." He carefully opened the envelope and spread several photographs across the dashboard. Warren's stomach turned as he examined each image. Dogs tied to posts without water, others with visible injuries, and some that looked more dead than alive. "How many?" he managed to ask. 27 that I counted. Maybe more." Miguel's eyes were distant. "Curtis calls it training, but it's torture. The ones that don't meet his standards." He trailed off, unable to finish. Warren gathered the photos carefully, his mind already racing to his next step. "Would you be willing to tell this to someone else?" Miguel hesitated before nodding slowly. About time somebody stood up to him. Warren's first stop was the veterinary clinic. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as he pulled into the parking lot, the envelope of photos feeling heavy in his jacket pocket. Inside, Cecilia was finishing up with a patient, but her expression changed when she saw Warren's face. "Something's wrong," she said, not a question. Warren waited until her assistant had left before spreading the photos across her examination table. Cecilia's sharp intake of breath echoed in the sterile room. "These are all from Curtis's ranch?" she asked, examining each photo with professional detachment, though her hands trembled slightly. Miguel Santos, former ranch hand, kept them as evidence, but he was too scared to come forward alone. Warren watched as she methodically arranged the photos. "I need your help, Cecilia. You've treated some of his dogs before, haven't you?" She nodded slowly, moving to a filing cabinet. "I've documented everything I could, but it was never enough for concrete proof." She pulled out a thick folder. "Medical records, injury patterns, suspicious deaths. I kept copies of everything." "Why didn't you report it?" Cecilia's laugh was bitter. "To whom?" "Curtis owns half the county council. The sheriff golfs with him every Sunday." She met Warren's eyes. "But with these photos, my records, and Miguel's testimony, we might have something." Warren felt a mix of hope and dread settle in his chest. "It'll be dangerous. Curtis won't take this lying down." "He's already dangerous," Cecilia replied, her voice firm. "Every time I treated one of his training accidents, I was enabling him. Not anymore." They spent the next 3 hours organizing their evidence. Cecilia matched her medical records to specific photos, creating a timeline of abuse. Warren called Miguel, who agreed to write a detailed statement about his time at the ranch. "We need more witnesses," Cecilia said, rubbing her tired eyes. "Former employees, other vets who might have treated his dogs." Warren nodded, thinking of the network of people who must have seen something over the years. "I can talk to some of the local farm suppliers. Curtis must have bought his equipment somewhere." "I'll reach out to other clinics in the region," Cecilia added. "Carefully, of course. We can't tip him off." As they worked, Warren couldn't help but notice how Cecilia's professional demeanor occasionally cracked, revealing glimpses of fear. "You don't have to risk your practice for this," he said softly. She looked up from her paperwork, her expression determined. "Yes, I do. We all do. Someone has to stop him." They developed a system. Warren would gather testimonies while Cecilia collected medical evidence. They met after hours at the clinic, building their case piece by piece. Each day brought new revelations, new witnesses willing to speak if they weren't alone. A week into their investigation, Warren arrived at the clinic to find Cecilia pacing anxiously. "Curtis called today," she said without preamble. "Wanted to know if I'd treated any strays lately." Warren felt his chest tighten. "He suspects. He's fishing," she replied. but we need to move faster. The longer we wait, the more likely he'll figure out what we're doing." They spread their evidence across the examination table. Dozens of photographs, medical records spanning 5 years, statements from 3 former employees, and receipts showing suspicious purchases of medical supplies. "It's not just about chance anymore," Warren said, looking at the overwhelming proof of systematic abuse. "This is about every dog he's ever hurt and everyone he might hurt in the future." Cecilia nodded, her face set with determination. "We need to make this public in a way he can't control or deny. The annual county fair is next month. Everyone will be there, including the state representatives." "A public confrontation?" Warren asked, feeling both terrified and oddly relieved at the thought of finally taking action. "More than that," Cecilia said. "We make copies of everything, create information packets, hand them out to everyone who matters, make it impossible to ignore." Warren studied the evidence they'd gathered, thinking of Chance at home with Delia, of the dead coyote, of Miguel's shaking hands as he shared his photos. He was no longer just protecting one dog. He was challenging a system that had allowed this cruelty to continue for years. "We'll need help," he said finally. "People we can trust to distribute the information, to stand with us when Curtis retaliates." "We already have help," Cecilia reminded him, gesturing to their growing pile of evidence. "Every person who's contributed to this is ready to stand up. They just needed someone to take the first step." As they continued planning, Warren realized how far he'd come from that moment on the dusty road with a dying puppy. He'd become something he never expected, a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but looking at Cecilia's determined face, the damning evidence spread before them, and thinking of Chance's trusting eyes, Warren knew they had no choice but to see this through to the end. The night was unusually still when Warren heard Chance's first warning bark. He'd been dozing in his armchair, exhausted from another day of gathering evidence, when the dog's urgent sounds jolted him awake. Through the window, he could see Delia's light still on in the garage apartment where she often stayed up late studying. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Warren burst through his front door, Chance already racing ahead. Orange flames were beginning to lick up the side of the garage, spreading with frightening speed. His heart stopped when he realized the fire had started near the stairs, Delia's only exit. "Delia!" he screamed, running toward the building. The heat hit him like a wall, and he could hear the crackle of wood giving way. "Delia!" Her voice came through the upstairs window, high with panic. "Uncle Warren! I can't get down. The stairs are on fire." Chance circled the building frantically, barking with increasing desperation. The smoke was getting thicker, black and choking. Warren could hear things exploding inside. Oil cans, gas tanks, all the materials of his life's work becoming weapons. "Stay by the window!" Warren shouted, coughing as he tried to think through his terror. The garage door wouldn't open. Something was blocking it from the inside. He could hear Delia coughing now, her voice growing weaker. Chance suddenly shot forward, finding a gap where the side door had warped from the heat. The dog squeezed through before Warren could stop him. Seconds later, Warren heard Delia cry out, "Chance is here!" Warren grabbed a metal pipe from his yard and smashed through what remained of the side door. The heat was unbearable, but he could hear Chance barking upstairs, guiding him. Through the smoke, he saw that the wooden stairs were almost gone, consumed by flames that seemed to dance with malicious intent. "Jump!" he yelled. "I'll catch you!" But the smoke was too thick now. He could barely see, barely breathe. The building groaned ominously above him. Then he heard Chance bark again, followed by the sound of movement upstairs. Through the haze, he saw them. Chance had grabbed Delia's sleeve, pulling her toward a section of the upstairs floor that hadn't yet been consumed. Warren understood immediately. It was directly above a heavy workbench, the sturdiest part of the structure. "Delia, break through!" he shouted. "The floor! Break through!" He heard thumping, then cracking. The weakened floorboards gave way, and suddenly Delia was falling. Warren lunged forward, catching her as they both crashed to the ground. Chance leapt down after them, fur singed but eyes alert. They weren't safe yet. The garage was groaning, support beams crackling with heat. Warren half-carried, half-dragged Delia toward the exit, Chance pressing against their legs, helping guide them through the smoke. They burst out into the cool night air just as the roof collapsed with a deafening roar. Warren pulled Delia farther back, watching helplessly as his garage, his business, his independence, disappeared into an inferno. Delia was trembling violently in his arms, coughing and crying. Chance pressed close, whimpering softly as he nuzzled them both. In the distance, sirens were finally approaching, but Warren knew it was too late for the garage. As neighbors began appearing with garden hoses and blankets, Warren held Delia tighter, the reality of how close he'd come to losing her hitting him full force. His throat closed up, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, was gone. But worse, so much worse, was knowing that Curtis had been willing to kill a teenage girl just to make a point. Warren sank to his knees, still clutching Delia, feeling the weight of despair pressing down on him like a physical thing. The fire department arrived, their lights casting strange shadows across the scene of destruction. Someone was asking him questions, but he couldn't focus enough to answer. "Uncle Warren?" Delia's voice was rough from smoke, but her eyes were fixed on his face. Despite everything, despite the terror she'd just lived through, she was looking at him with complete trust. "We're not giving up, are we?" Warren looked at his niece, then at Chance, who sat alertly beside them, ready despite his singed fur and burned paws to defend his family. The dog's amber eyes met his, showing the same unshakable loyalty that had helped him survive Curtis's cruelty in the first place. Something shifted in Warren's chest, replacing the crushing despair with a steel-hard resolve. Curtis hadn't just attacked him anymore, he'd tried to destroy everything Warren loved. The garage could be rebuilt, but the line had been crossed. This wasn't about one dog or one man's cruelty anymore. This was about stopping someone who would burn down a building with a child inside just to maintain his power. "No," Warren said finally, his voice hoarse, but firm. "We're not giving up. Not ever." The fire continued to burn behind them, consuming the last of Warren's livelihood, but he felt stronger than he had all night. In Delia's trust and Chance's loyalty, he found the strength to stand again, to face whatever came next. Curtis had meant to break him with this act of devastation, but instead he'd only proved how desperately he needed to be stopped. The morning of the livestock auction dawned crisp and clear, but Warren's hands trembled as he gathered the manila envelope stuffed with evidence. Photographs spilled onto his kitchen table, dozens of them showing emaciated dogs, makeshift graves, and the brutal training equipment found on Curtis's ranch. His throat tightened looking at them again. "Are you sure about this, Uncle Warren?" Delia asked, standing in the doorway with Chance pressed against her leg. The German Shepherd had filled out beautifully in their care, his amber eyes now bright and alert instead of desperate. "No choice now," Warren replied, carefully sliding everything back into the envelope. "Curtis won't stop unless we stop him." The county fairgrounds were already bustling when they arrived. Pickup trucks kicked up dust in the parking lot while ranchers and townspeople filed into the auction arena. Warren spotted Curtis near the entrance, holding court with his usual crowd of admirers. The sight of him made Warren's jaw clench. Inside, the wooden bleachers creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the county. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the murmur of conversation. Warren found Cecilia waiting by the auctioneer's podium, her face tight with worry. "I brought everything," she whispered, passing him another envelope. Medical records, dated photographs of Chance when you brought him in, statements from former employees. Are you absolutely certain about doing this here? Warren nodded grimly. Most public place possible. Can't sweep it under the rug this time. He waited until the first round of bidding finished, his heart pounding so hard he could barely hear the auctioneer's rapid-fire calls. When the man paused to take a drink of water, Warren stood. I need to address something before we continue, he called out, his voice carrying across the arena. Heads turned, conversation dying down to confused murmurs. Curtis's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Warren moved to the center of the arena, Chance padding faithfully beside him. Most of you know me. Know I'm not one for making speeches, but there's something you all need to see. He began passing out the photographs, watching faces change from curiosity to horror. These came from Curtis Harlow's ranch. This is what he does to dogs that don't meet his standards. This dog here, he gestured to Chance, barely survived having his head forced into a glass bottle and being left to die. The murmurs grew louder. Curtis stood abruptly, his face mottled with rage. That's slander, Keats. You're nothing but a thief spreading lies. But Warren kept going, his voice stronger now. I have sworn statements from 3 former ranch hands, medical records, proof of dozens of dogs killed through neglect or outright cruelty. This stops today. Curtis shoved his way through the crowd, snatching a branding iron from near the holding pens. I said, shut your mouth! He roared, charging forward with the iron raised. Everything happened in a blur. Curtis swung the heated metal, but Chance launched himself forward with a snarl, catching Curtis's arm in powerful jaws. The rancher howled, the branding iron clattering to the ground. Warren seized his chance, tackling Curtis hard enough to drive the breath from both of them. They crashed into the dirt, Curtis thrashing and cursing. But Warren had leverage and desperation on his side. He pinned the larger man, twisting his arm behind his back until Curtis went still, panting and defeated in front of the horrified crowd. Someone call the sheriff! Warren heard Cecilia shout. And animal control. They need to see all of this. Looking up, Warren saw dozens of phones recording, shocked faces, and nods of grim approval. Chance stood guard, hackles still raised but steady. The truth was out now, impossible to ignore or deny. Curtis's influence couldn't protect him anymore. As 2 deputies pushed through the crowd to take control of the situation, Warren felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He reached out to scratch Chance's ears, the dog's tail wagging as he pressed against Warren's leg. Good boy, Warren whispered. We did it. It's over. The arena erupted in conversation as Curtis was led away in handcuffs, his threats and protests falling on deaf ears. Warren stayed where he was, accepting handshakes and words of support from people who'd avoided his eyes just days before. Chance remained by his side, head held high, the living proof of both Curtis's cruelty and the power of standing against it. Delia pushed through the crowd to throw her arms around him. You did it, Uncle Warren. You really did it. Warren hugged her back, watching as animal control officers took statements and collected evidence. The truth had finally come to light in the most public way possible. Curtis's reign of cruelty was finished, exposed in front of the very community he'd tried to control, through fear and influence. The county courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and onlookers as Curtis Harlow was led out in handcuffs. Warren stood at the back of the crowd, watching the man who had terrorized so many being escorted to a waiting police car. Curtis's face was ashen, his swagger gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man facing real consequences for the first time. Multiple counts of animal cruelty, arson, attempted murder. The district attorney announced to the assembled press. The state is seizing the Harlow Ranch property as evidence in an ongoing investigation. Warren felt Delia's small hand slip into his. She had insisted on being here to see it end, and maybe she was right. They needed this closure, needed to see justice actually happen. Chance sat alertly at Warren's other side, his amber eyes fixed on Curtis. The dog had filled out in the months since his rescue, his coat now glossy and healthy. But more than that, his spirit had healed. The trembling, dying puppy Warren had found on that dusty road was now a confident, loving companion. Back home, Warren surveyed the charred remains of his garage. The insurance would cover some of it, but rebuilding would take time. Still, he found he didn't feel the crushing weight of loss he'd expected. The tools and equipment could be replaced. What mattered most was right here with him, Delia safe and sound, Chance keeping faithful watch. "We should plant a garden," Delia suggested one morning, pointing to the empty space where the garage had stood. Something beautiful instead of just rebuilding exactly the same. Warren considered it, watching as she scratched diagrams in the dirt with a stick. "Maybe we could do both," he said. "Build the new garage a little smaller, leave room for your garden." Her face lit up. "Really? Can we grow tomatoes? And flowers?" "Whatever you want, sweetheart." He pulled her close, grateful beyond words that she had survived the fire. The thought of losing her still haunted his dreams sometimes. The following weeks fell into a new rhythm. Warren took mechanic work where he could find it, making house calls to regular customers while planning the rebuild, but he also found himself drawn into a different kind of work. People started calling him about abandoned or abused animals, knowing he was someone who would help. "You're becoming the neighborhood guardian angel," Cecilia teased during one of Chance's checkups. "Half my rescue cases come through you now." Warren shrugged, embarrassed but not unhappy about it. Just seems right after everything. One crisp fall morning, Warren was out mending the fence line that marked his modest property. Chance trotted alongside him, carrying tools in a special vest Delia had modified for him. The dog had taken to helping, with an enthusiasm that made every task take twice as long, but brought smiles to their faces. Delia sat nearby in the grass, working on her homework while keeping them company. The morning sun caught her hair, reminding Warren of his sister. She would have been proud of how her daughter had grown, how brave she'd become. As he hammered a loose board back into place, Warren reflected on how much had changed. His life wasn't easier now. There were still bills to pay, a business to rebuild, and plenty of hard work ahead. But it felt fuller, more meaningful. Standing against Curtis hadn't just saved Chance, it had shown Warren who he really was and what he was capable of. "Uncle Warren?" Delia called out. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" He smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Sure thing, kiddo, as soon as I finish this section." Chance barked happily, dropping a hammer at Warren's feet before bounding over to lick Delia's face, making her giggle. The sound carried across their small piece of Texas, a reminder that sometimes the richest rewards come from standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. The fence might still need work, and the garage was just a foundation so far, but Warren felt more at home than ever. Life had left its scars on all of them, but those marks had only made their bonds stronger. Justice had been served, and in its wake they had found something better than revenge. They had found family. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.